I'm Molly O'Brien. Thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday afternoon. It is February 22nd, and thank you again for joining us. We have a packed show for you this afternoon with a variety of topics. I'd like to say hello and welcome to my first guest. She is Elizabeth Flock. She is an author and a journalist with PBS's NewsHour, and today we're going to be talking about her new book, The Heart is a Shifting Sea, Love and Marriage in Mumbai. Elizabeth is joining us via Skype today. Elizabeth, hello and thank you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
The book is excellent. I have to say I am not quite done with it as of yet, but beautifully written, fascinating topics. You look at the life of three different couples in Mumbai and over the course of a significant period of time. So let's dive into this. Talk to me just a little bit about what drew you into writing this book.
Sure. Well, I moved to Mumbai, India about 10 years ago after graduating college. I was broke at the time, a bit restless and homesick. And for a combination of those reasons, I ended up living with three different couples and actually more than that in Mumbai. And as I was living with these different Indian families that welcomed me into their home, I started to get interested as a journalist in writing about marriage, because I think really the only way that you can see what's happening inside a marriage is really being inside people's homes. Had always been interested in the idea of writing about marriage, but these marriages in particular fascinated me. The way that love is expressed in India was interesting to me, and India itself was at such a time of huge social and cultural change that was placing a lot of tension on marriages, and I was interested in how that tension was playing out.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. And like I said, it is very inspiring, it's intriguing, it's almost intimidating when you're looking at this and really seeing how the course of these relationships are playing out. It's a deeply personal journey into these couples' relationships. How did you actually make the connections to these couples and able to convince them to let you tell their story?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is time. I began this project 10 years ago, and at first I was just sort of informally asking them questions about their marriages because I was curious, and I was sort of, asking, why is this the way it is? Why does your husband ask you not to sleep in your bedroom when you have your period? Why is it that you are interested in having an affair or getting divorced when your mother's generation was not interested in that at all? Things changing. And then over time, it developed into a more formal process with sit-down interviews and just spending tremendous amount of time living with these couples, traveling with them, eating alongside them, taking care of their children at times, living with their extended joint families, because in India, so many families are 12 people living together. And I think it was just a product of time and, hopefully the trust they placed in me to tell their stories accurately and fairly and to show both sides at times.
Talk to us a little bit about the couples within this book, because you take a look at three couples who are very different but also similar in their relationships. Talk to us about a little bit about each one.
So I followed three couples that are middle-class, English-speaking couples in India, and I was interested in following middle-class couples because there's so much tension being placed in the middle class right now in terms of morality and rules and what rules you can follow or break as people are upwardly mobile and there's the social and cultural change. The three couples that I followed them all, I think, because they were in a way romantic, but also rule breakers and sort of testing these boundaries. There's Maya and Veer, who had a love marriage against all odds, against her parents' wishes, and ran away, but then are dealing with Maya's desire for independence and infidelity after she doesn't sort of get the companionship she hoped for in this love marriage. There's Ashok and Parvati, which is a younger couple that had a sort of hybrid, half-arranged, half-love marriage, which is more common in India today, where you sort of say, the parents say you have to find someone within these certain parameters, but then you can choose whoever you want, as long as it's a Brahmin from the highest caste, as long as it's a Hindu. And they're dealing with sort of trying to fall in love after getting married. And then the third couple is Shahzad and Sabina, which is a Muslim couple that's older, that is not able to have children, and they're dealing with coming to terms with that because they're their community does not allow adopting children.
What was it like for you to be a part of these families? I mean, these are, it's so deeply personal. You become, I mean, you have to be a bystander, a fly on the wall, to be unbiased, right? Because you are a journalist, but you are really observing the most personal, intimate details of these people's relationships. How do you stay unbiased so you can, in fact, tell a fair story?
Yeah, I mean, at times I felt more like a therapist or like a third wheel. But certainly, I tried as much as I could not to feel like I was taking sides with, a husband or a wife. And it's hard not to feel that way at times. I felt, personally upset with one half of the couple for treating someone the other way. But at the end of the day, I just tried to keep asking questions. And, in any given scene that I write about, I asked both of them how they felt about it, what they were thinking at the time. And I think the way that you don't take sides in a way is through empathy and through understanding, okay, her husband's not coming home every night for dinner. He's never showing up. He's working insane hours, but she feels really alone. If you speak to him and he says, I'm just trying to make money so we can have a stable life and I'm really worried about that, I mean, you can start to understand. So I think it was a product of asking them questions both together and separately and trying to understand where everyone was coming from.
In the true nature of journalism, getting both sides of the story almost, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Um,
Yeah, I think reporting on marriage is an interesting thing because you have to use the same tools you would in reporting, but it's just a subject that's not normally reported on through like, old school shoe leather reporting with a notepad, and so it's a
it's
little bit difficult.
I mean, it really is fascinating. Kind of going along those lines, and I've heard you speak about this in other interviews as well. Coming from a culture that is not your own, how did you make sure that you were telling the stories um, appropriately and fairly when you are a white woman from America going into
Yeah.
India? How did you make sure that you were appropriately telling these stories?
Well, I think that's why I decided to leave myself out of it. I was originally going to have some of the book written in first person, but I felt like I wanted as much as possible to allow these people to tell their own stories and have it be in their own voice and have them be observing what was happening in their marriage and the changes that were taking place more broadly in the country. But I think it's also about just coming from a place of knowing that you don't know anything and you're starting from scratch. And I might feel like I have a handle on things because I know some Hindi or because I've spent a lot of time with these people. But at the end of the day, you're working across cultural barriers, language barriers. There's a whole lot that I'm sure I was missing. And knowing that and having to, I think, work as hard as you could to understand what you don't know. And so there were, dozens and dozens of interviews I conducted that never made its way into this book with psychologists and Bollywood stars and doctors and researchers about love and marriage in India that I used to inform this book because I felt, in a way so ignorant because I'm not Indian, I'm not married, so I'm approaching this subject from scratch.
I mean, it is absolutely fascinating. What went into the process of actually writing this book? You were in India, you were working for a publication over there, and then you kind of found your way into wanting to write this novel. What was the process like collecting interviews? I mean, you were there for 10 years working on this, but what was the actual process like for collecting interviews? Did you write this book over the course of 10 years, or how did it come to be?
I started it 10 years ago, just taking notes. And then, over time, I gave up on it. I thought, I'm not Indian and I'm not married. I shouldn't be writing this book. And I gave it up altogether for really 5 years. But I kept in touch with those couples over that time. And then back in sort of like 2013 is when I picked it up again. And that's when I went back to India on extended reporting trips where I lived with the couples inside their house for like a month at a time, and then went back again and did that again. And that was when I did the formal interviews and began writing and keeping notes and organizing those notes and being really systematic about it. So the bulk of the reporting, the formal reporting, took place from 2013 to present. So.
And you were really part of these people's lives, whether you tried to be a bystander or not. Are you able to keep in touch with these families? Do you want to?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they welcome me into their house as family, and I think of them that way, in a way. And we've been in touch since they've read the book, and the book is coming out in India in June. So we're in constant contact mostly over WhatsApp and sometimes Skype. So yeah, I think I'll be in touch with them always for the rest of my life.
I think it would be hard not to, becoming part of their family. It would seem like, I don't know, it wasn't
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you went to India, and I feel like, do you think you were looking for answers about love and marriage just in general?
Definitely. I mean, I wasn't thinking that at the time, but in hindsight, I moved to India after my father's third divorce, and I'd grown up with a lot of divorce in my family. And I think I was just curious why marriages work or fail in any culture, in any context. Like, what is that special thing that makes a marriage work instead of fall apart? And so I think these couples to me provided lessons and answers in a way. Of course, the longer I spent with them, I saw that some of the problems and promises of marriage, many of them are the same in any culture, and some of them are specific to India. But it's not like I came away, I don't think, with like a magic solution of what makes marriages work. But I do feel like I learned a lot and got a little bit closer on that question. But love is a very difficult to pin down thing, and marriage is a very complicated thing. So there is no magic answer, unfortunately.
But at least that you got some understanding and maybe a sense of what you were looking for, that there is no real answer. It is difficult.
Yeah.
Marriage is difficult.
Yeah. So I hear.
No matter where you go, I think that answer is the same. It's work. Yes. It's going to be work no matter where you go.
Yes.
I do kind of want to ask you too, what do you think comes next for you? You just completed this massive task, and continuing to write, continuing to keep in touch. Do you think that you will take on another large project like this, or is it kind of one step at a time now?
I do. I actually have been more and more interested in writing just about women's issues, because so much of this book ended up being about the women, and the way that things are changing in India for women. Women are gaining more agency. They're going to work. They're being educated in much greater numbers. They're having affairs. They're having premarital sex. They're watching pornography. All of these changes, really big changes, are happening for Indian women. And obviously the Me Too movement here has been really interesting to watch and important. And India has had a similar moment actually about 5 years ago, when there was a 2012 gang rape of a student and thousands of women came out to the streets. So I think I'm interested in continuing to tell the stories of women gaining more agency around the world. And I hope to do another sort of immersion journalism book that tells those kinds of stories.
Be able to provide that voice for these women around the world.
Yeah.
Excellent opportunity to do so. You will be headed to our neck of the woods here tomorrow, Friday, February
Correct.
23rd. You're going to be at the Harvard bookstore, so that should be good. Where else are you heading on a somewhat book tour?
I'm going to Chicago, LA, San Francisco, and New York.
And have you been on book tour before? What has questions been like, talkbacks been like for you with people reading this? Because the book hasn't been out that long.
Yeah, it just started. I had an event in DC where I live last week at Politics and Prose, which is a lovely independent bookstore here, and it went really well. Although there was, one really interesting Indian woman in the audience who stood up and made the point, not all Indian women are having affairs. And of course, there certainly is going to be, I think, some pushback to the book and the things that are talked about within it, because people don't talk about some of these things. I mean, sex and affair, infidelity, pornography, all of these things are really difficult to talk about in India right now and in previous generations. And so I do hope it sparks those conversations and gets people to talk about that, because I think these things that are happening are important to discuss, even if they're a little bit difficult and sensitive. So.
Well, congratulations to you on publishing your first book. I have to say that it is beautifully written. At times, you have to remind yourself that these are real people telling their stories. I have to say that I was drawn in, and I needed to remind myself it's not fictional. So,
Thank you.
kudos to you for your writing.
Good to hear. Thank you.
So I do appreciate your time today, Elizabeth Locke. She is a journalist at PBS NewsHour, and you can find her book, The Heart is a Shifting Sea, Love and Marriage in Mumbai. Where do you like to get your books, Elizabeth?
Independent bookstores, Politics and Prose in DC, but any independent bookstore is always good to support. So
awesome. I always like asking people. Always like asking people. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time today. Everyone, please hang tight as we get ready for our next guest on Go Local Live.